So what I'm starting with for my wet on dry technique, I'd like to make kind of a flower similar to the one that's in the picture. I've watered down my purple paint, and what I'm doing is I have 3 different values. I have really watered down purple, and I have semi-transparent purple, and then I have purple straight from the palette. So the idea with all of those different pigments is that I'm able to go in with a really light purple to start. And even that extra light purple that I'm applying to the paper, it has a beautiful, subtle color. One of the problems I see sometimes in watercolor painting with beginning students is they immediately go with the paint that's straight from the palette. When you go straight from the palette, it's often going to go on super, super heavy and opaque. And it's better to build up your color as you're going. Now, before I move into the next one, this is where you have to be careful. With wet on dry and fine detail, you do have to spend a little time waiting. What I'm talking about is if I immediately go in and start doing my next value, I am very likely going to create an entire cloud. You're not going to see the light color and then the medium color and then the dark colors. It's all going to start to blend together. So I'm going to give that just a little bit of time to dry, and then I'm going to give just a little outline of a stem using a watered down green. I'm also making sure that my green, I'm going to mix it with a little bit of purple. That might seem a little strange. When you're working with a specific color, and in this case purple, it doesn't hurt to take a little bit of that color that you're using, in this case for a flower, and apply that to the color that you're using for another part. What it does is it kind of creates a color palette. It's getting you colors that seem to blend together a little bit. So I have a little bit of green mixed in with some purple. I'm going to dry my brush, and I'm going to apply that one more time. That time it looked really, really purple. Not enough green. Now I'm taking my brush and I'm going to squeeze out any of the excess water. And now I'm about ready to start adding some of my deeper values. I can't stress enough how frustrating it is when you get a brush that does not have a tip. When you're doing fine detail, the tip is everything. So this one here is going to give me a much better tip. And I'm going to tickle my water, and I'm going to tickle the paint that I had mixed on my palette. This is my medium value. And I'm just going to tickle the paper very lightly, just a little, kind of like a stipple if you've had drawing class. And what I'm doing is I'm going to go back and forth between my medium value and my darkest one. Here I am bringing in some of the dark ones, and it's still blending just a little. Now this one does take time. It's not one of the fastest ones, but it's the most rewarding. Now, if you're sitting at your seat and you're working and you're like, oh my gosh, it's all blending together, don't worry, you can always move to another section, okay? I made a mistake on my paper. It's just a piece of paper, no big deal. So right now I'm creating the illusion of this little flower. And I'm using dots to give that illusion of little shadows and details. Okay, all I'm doing is touching the tip of my brush to the water, or excuse me, the color, and then I'm applying it with a very, very light touch of the paper. The times where it works the best is when I've taken my paintbrush and I've wiped it off with a paper towel. I'm going to fix my point to my paintbrush again. And then I'm going to touch very lightly to my paint. And now that's when you're seeing those teeny tiny little dots. And all I'm doing is using a lot of patience. Does it take more time? Absolutely. But if you take your time when it comes to watercolor or any kind of painting for that matter, you'll be rewarded with details that are going to surprise you and how beautiful it looks. Now, you've also heard me mention the word rewarded. You're rewarded with that fine detail as long as you take the time. Anytime my brush is not going to a point, I'm going to take my fingers, my thumb and my forefinger, and I'm going to pinch it until it comes to a point again. Because if I don't have that point, I really can't do the detail that I want to do. Now, when you look at the flower that we're painting, I'm giving an illusion of that flower. I'm not painting it exactly. I don't want to overwhelm you. But if you're looking at that flower, it's a dahlia flower, I'd say, or perhaps a hydrangea. What you're looking at is a lot of small petals. And what you're seeing is a lot of little shadows underneath where the petals are lighter, or where the light is hitting the petal. Those shadows are where I'm going in at the bottom with the darker, or the watercolor that has the least amount of water in it. So if you wanted to make it look more like petals, I'm creating what looks like little letter U's. You're creating an illusion of a flower. You're showing your version, your understanding of that. My understanding and your understanding is going to look different. You're not going to make a painting that looks just like mine, and you don't want to. But you can use my guidance to help you understand how to look at a picture and be able to paint what you see. So at the bottom, I'm starting to see what looks like that flower. Now I'm going to go back up to the top, and because that's a lighter area of the flower, you can see that it's much more watered down paint in that area. I'm going to switch gears with my paintbrush, and I'm going to move into the lighter values. And now I'm going to apply some more of that to the top of what looks like that flower. And the very top, I'm going to leave it alone for now. Kind of in the middle part of the flower, I guess you could say. The top is where it's much lighter, where you see the ever so slightly the edge of that flower. Another thing to be careful of and mindful when painting things that are in nature is that most of the time nature is imperfect. Even though I know flowers can definitely look perfect, I also want to be mindful that I'm not making dots that are in perfect rows. Okay, I'm making sure that if I'm using dots, or if I'm making a pattern, that I'm being mindful that in that picture, that flower does not have straight lines, that the flower has various tints and shades. So I'm always comparing what I'm doing to that picture. And when you make a mistake, and believe me, that will happen, I want you to know what to do or have the confidence that you can fix it. So I have little areas where I have gotten some paint that I didn't want it to be in that spot. Remember that you can take a paper towel, dip it in your water, and apply it to the paper so that you're able to make that area disappear, or at least lighten it. Much of what I do is a lot of back and forth between different techniques. It's repetitive. I've also noticed that my paper's pretty wet at this stage, and that wet on dry technique is not working so well. It means I need to let my paper dry a little bit, and that's where you really have to have patience. Now, I have seen students pick up their paper and start to fan it in the air. And when that happens, a lot of times your water or your paper, the paint on your paper is going to start to run down the page. So be mindful. I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but it does happen. It does happen. All right, now I'm gonna let my flower dry a bit, and I'm gonna work on the petals. I'm gonna mix up a bit of green, mixed up with a little bit of purple, and maybe a touch of brown or black. What I want to do is go from what many people will the standard practice that I see in students is that they go straight for the green, and they go green paint straight to the paper. I want you to learn to mix your colors. So now I'm gonna go in and I'm applying what was the same green that you all have in your palette. And now I have mixed mine with a little bit of a purple. Why I chose purple? Because my flower is purple. When you have a painting, it's good to come up with a palette of colors that go together, okay? The colors that have some of the same characteristics. So I mix a little bit of purple in with my green, and now I'm just gonna start to apply that to the paper to give myself more of a deeper hue for those little petals. I don't like the shape of the petals that I made, but it's just a piece of paper, it's just a little practice. If I wanted to change it, I certainly can. And what you're gonna see is that I'm gonna add some different colors to the paint, and what that's gonna do is it's gonna start to create a sense of depth. Obviously, when you compare the picture on the left and then you compare my painting, there's a really big difference in the colors, okay? If you look at the petals. If you look at the petals, there's a lot deeper color in the petals. Notice that I started light. If you start light, you can build. If you build up your color on your paper, your chances of success are much higher. If you start with your dark colors and try to work backwards to the light colors, it tends to not go as well. So that's definitely a trick that you want to keep in your toolbox, to remember to start light. And experiment with mixing your colors. So I'm gonna apply a little bit of a brown to this. And what you'll see is that now my paints are all starting to kind of blend together a little bit. That's okay. It looks like wet on wet finish in here. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to show you how to, kind of make it look more like the petals you see in the picture with that fine detail in there. Right now, I'm just building up a little bit of color, and I'm going to apply a tiny bit of black. If you're going to use black, You need to know that you really, really have to be careful because black will overpower very, very quickly. So in this case, I'm just adding black in the areas where I guess the flower's creating a shadow. And I am ever so lightly applying it. I'm applying it in kind of a stipple, like little dots. And that's how I'm able to achieve that. And I'm gonna go back to my purple and my brown and my green. And I'm mixing those in my palette. I could also add a little blue to that if I wanted to. And what I'm doing is playing with different colors in my palette to achieve the look that I want. There's definitely a point where you have to stop and let the paper dry. And I feel like I'm at that stage. There's not a whole lot I can do right now without it turning into a muddy mess. What I want to be able to do is fine tune it just a bit. Give those little jagged edges that you see in the picture. I'm gonna take my brush, pinch the tip so I get a nice fine point. And I'm just gonna really lightly add those little jagged edges. And I really don't have much paint on my brush at all. Now I'm adding the ever so lightly. I am so lightly tickling the paper, and I'm gonna give an edge to that stem. I think the most important thing that you can learn about fine detail is that, especially with watercolor, is that the less water you have on your brush, the better, and the finer your point, the better off you're gonna be. All right, one last step. I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of blue to the flower. So I'm going into that area with just a little bit of blue mixed in with some water, not blue straight from the palette. Mixing it up with some water, and I'm gonna apply that to some of the white areas down at the bottom of my flower. Because I gave it time to let it dry a little bit, it's really working much better to be able to make some more colors in here.